What's up, y'all? This is Rebel Ray, your hostess with the mostest, and thank you for joining the Prune Tree Podcast. Listen, we have a wonderful guest today that will be joining us on this important topic. And what this topic is dear to me because we know that many of our ancestors gave a lot for us to be here, be educated, and be able to give the things that we're needing. And a lot of times we have, paved the way. We have made an assumption that we've made it there, and we've found equity in education. But before I bring my special guest on, I have a couple of updates. Like I always want to give you, I want to give you a shout out for making it in today. You understand what I'm saying? Waking up this morning, being on your day, it's important. It's important for you to say your affirmations. It's important for you to talk with yourself, reach your higher self, connect with like minded people, and understand the assignment, right? We were born into this day to complete something. We all have divine purpose and understanding of what we're needing to do. And it's important that we continue those efforts, even when we're faced with trials and tribulation. At the Prune Tree, we often talk about what's needed for the self, why it's important to show up as your authentic self, what your ancestors gave so you can be here. And we continue to look at ourselves. We continue to support and understand how to get to our higher consciousness. And that starts with education. Now we know in America, education has somewhat been watered down. Even now, we've seen efforts to erase history that does not fit the status quo. And a lot of times, we often will find that others' histories who need to be recognized have now um, hasn't been as important as the status quo. So I'm very, very excited to introduce my next guest here. This person is very important to our community, and they have, pushed themselves to be an advocate for the education of our children and what we're needing to sustain us. And as you listen to this podcast, or even as you're viewing it, I want you to always remember you can drop your comments in the chat. You can come on backstage. We believe in interaction, and we're critical thinkers here, and that's okay. And so, without further ado, let's bring in Mr. Phillip Hon. Hi, Phillip. Welcome.
Hi, good evening, Rebel Ray. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Now, listen, you got to absolutely introduce yourself. You are an amazing person, an amazing leader here, an educator here in Greater San Joaquin, but also in Stockton, California. So I'm going to give the mic to you.
I appreciate that. And I think introducing myself means bringing all my full identities to the table. So my name is Phillip Hon, pronouns he, him, or they, them. And I am a first generation Asian American male whose parents immigrated to this country, who saw education opportunity as a way of pursuing more glorious paths for myself, our family, and I continue to carry that as a career educator. So I not only grew up in Stockton, went to school here, graduated, and I kind of followed the path that was told to me that if you get your education, you can be successful. So I studied hard and worked hard, but was also told the narrative that to be successful also meant leaving your city. So I ended up going to Stanford, studied public policy with a concentration in education policy. So I constantly think about the education I was afforded, but how often it was about leaving the community to do so. And I ended up becoming a career educator. So I got my master's in teaching credential, ended up teaching middle school, high school, elementary school before becoming a vice principal, a dean of culture, and this is actually across the nation. I spent some time in Oklahoma, spent some time in the state of Hawaii, and a lot of these pieces as an educator reminded me of some of the things I left back at home in Stockton, the diversity, the opportunities. And I'm finally here back at home, also studying and starting a doctoral dissertation around modern day segregation in K-12 schools, and then eliciting and starting an actual venture to disrupt that. Specifically, we are launching a diverse by design community-based school called Unbound Stockton, which I'm the lead founder and proposer of. And essentially, we want students of racially diverse, culturally diverse, socioeconomic backgrounds to be able to come together in a school, have shared goals through shared experiences, to learn together. We ultimately believe that that is how you create adults who are culturally competent, know how to work in diverse teams, and create solutions for our tomorrow. But I wouldn't be here today with all of those identities, creating who I am and bringing to the table the opportunity for my own education, but also to give back to those in the local Stockton and San Joaquin County community.
Ashe, and blessings to you, King, for coming in. And let me tell you, just giving all praises to our ancestors for guiding us to this point. You really gave a factor in really understanding too how to be cultural competent and knowing that we couldn't arrive at this point in time in our education in breaking down the construct if it wasn't for somebody that sacrificed. So I burn this incense for your ancestors and mine. With that being said, um, I kind of want to break down a little bit about what you said. You said a lot, and I'm so excited to have you here. Now, looking at Stockton, looking at Greater San Joaquin, I think in this dispensation of critical thought and social change theory, and how we now learn how to sway what's going on, there's a reversal that we're seeing in racial equity and inclusion and cultivating acceptance of others that are different than yours, so much that now some of the policies and laws that we fought so much for have been reversed. And now we hear you saying that you are trying to bring equity, racial equity, into the educational system. And for so long, we know that we were living off an archaic educational system. Can you tell us a little bit about what your studies have shown? Also, what you know other scholars are up against, like yourself, who are trying to change the system from within the system.
Absolutely. I think you speak to the modern current political context where we're pushing up against policies, changes to affirmative action, because there are people in our communities and places who think we've already arrived, that we've made so much progress and no more progress needs to be made because equity now exists. And I think that's such a detrimental fact and thought to put out there when we haven't even clearly wrestled with what is truly systemically existing in terms of inequity and injustice. And I often think some of this narrative even comes with how we consider and think about our community. You know, we get touted in Stockton, California as America's most diverse city in 2020 and think about how wonderful that is. But Stockton, like major metropolitan cities across this nation, are diverse yet divided. And we think this is seeped in a history of redlining and segregation and policies that have allowed certain people to buy property and live and be in places. And we fail to think about the impact that has on school, which is now divided by specifically the neighborhood you live in or where you're zoned. And so the inequities in school funding that also come from property tax values is quite significant. And then we go back to, if we look at the demographics of students in particular schools. You will have primarily schools with low socioeconomic students or primarily students of color. And so we need to wrap back around to think about how much and how far we've actually come in order to be able to address some of these issues and not come to the conclusion that we've arrived. I will acknowledge much progress has been made, but there's much needed to be done with regards to racial equity, as you called out too.
Now, we have moved into an era in the state of California. And the state of California, as big as we are, we've often had leaders on both sides, Republican and Democrat, who were forward thinkers. And a lot of times when I'm talking philosophical, or I'm talking political, or I'm talking educational, I try to keep a nonpartisan stance and look at the entire, wavelength of change. And what I notice is California is usually one of the first states to incorporate a lot of the changes that the other states need to follow. They're very forward thinking, right? And we're known to be progressives here. And I want to congratulate the state of California and the governor in being able to pass the commission that has been put in place for racial equity. And it would be a racial equity commission that will support some of the same things that you're talking about in different systems. Why is it so important, Philip, that we show the desegregation of education? Why is that important?
Absolutely. I think we look at our modern day politics and see how politicized things are. We see the venues and opportunities of social media where there's more of debating and arguing versus discourse and dialogue, which is truly what we need in a well-informed and collaborative society. And I think at the basis of it is we're not giving our youth, our children, that opportunity to be exposed to collaborate, to build relationships across lines of difference. And again, this goes back to the segregation that exists in schools when you zone schools based on their neighborhood boundaries. When we talk about the civil rights era, there was so much conversation on how do we integrate schools? How do we look at busing systems that give low-income students, Black and brown students, the same opportunity, the same resources by going into schools located in more affluent communities. And often that history is very dismissed in schools. When I think about the history of Brown versus Board, which is something you learn in school, is about school integration, but often people don't know within a year, Brown versus Board 2, the second court case, had to be established the following year to require integration to be moved at a expedient pace. Just because the first court case was established didn't mean it was actually happening. People resisting the efforts, and this was obviously deep-seated historical desire to keep people from being integrated. And again, if we don't learn to live together, work together, how do we create futures in which we're able to build together? And so being siloed has incredibly damaging effects. And the reason we don't talk about busing or integration today, again, goes back to this idea that we feel like we've arrived. But we also don't talk about in 1974, 20 years after Brown versus Board, there was a court case called Milliken versus Bradley, which said you did not have to integrate schools across different school district lines. And when we think about my hometown, our home community of Stockton, California, there's really 5 school districts that intersect into Stockton boundaries, the largest being unified. And that specifically is the largest proportion of students of color, highest proportion of free and reduced lunch. And you have these smaller communities that existed due to white flight and the creation of their own school districts,
Right.
implicitly to, not necessarily be a part of, being educated and learning with students of color. So there's a real deep history we have to heal from and recognize that we have been moving away from our opportunities to bring children together, to help them understand their identities, to unpack difference and really learn to truly collaborate. and brings us to a point to really question the relationships and dynamics we have as adults to really bring people together.
Listen, it starts with the adults. It starts at home, right? And so I want to slow this down a little bit because you're dropping gems. You're gathering us like the good auntie spirit. You know how the auntie come and she just gather everybody at the family reunion with all of the education. Listen, okay, what if I would say to you, oftentimes that I hear from parents, well, RC, I just want a quality education for my children. I pay taxes. They should have the best of the best in their schools. I chose this district to buy my home in so we could afford a good school. And if I can't have a good school, we'll go to a charter school or a private school to have a good school. Now, you're hearing a lot of this type of sentiment. And how do you argue with that when they say good school? Does it mean being around certain others that influence your children? Is it being around the fact that the school is 90% or even maybe 100%, like it is in my district that I represent in my advocacy, where they are on free lunch and they're considered marginalized and low income? How do you support and in the moment, in that teachable moment, share with parents the critical understanding of why we shouldn't segregate further?
Absolutely. I think one of the first pieces is, I think we would all agree that all students deserve good schools and all families deserve that for their children. And then I think the second layer is, how do we evaluate and consider what is the purpose of education? Is it specifically for your singular child to learn and grow and develop skills so they can access opportunity? Or is education more of a public good where we're working together, collaborating, and building a shared community and future together? There are many schools of thoughts on what is the purpose of education. And I think the great thing about having different school models and different school opportunities give parents the opportunity to choose the type of school and the type of education that they think is right for their child. I think one of the pieces around integration policies and the history of success of integration is the achievement gap between low income students. The achievement gap between Black and brown students versus white students was the lowest at the height of integration policies of 1988. When we talk about schools being more segregated, again, through policies of housing, through policies of even the creation of charter schools that may tend to serve one demographic or another. Our schools are more segregated than they were than 30 years ago. And the reality of it is you lose off on key features in terms of the ability to collaborate, the success of all students being raised, having the bar raised academically. And so the achievement gap was most closed at the height of integration. And so we shouldn't dismiss these opportunities to support academic success for all students by having these kinds of policies, being able to be more confident and comfortable in one's own identity, as well as the opportunity to have access to opportunities in college and beyond just by being in spaces that are much more integrated. And that's not to say there isn't a more nuanced conversation in how you implement that, because the implementation of integration often meant the firing of teachers of color, Black teachers, to move them into schools with white teachers. And I think that is the other piece, is true integration happens at every level of a school system, the staff, the board, the students, and really adhering that to be a core part of your mission and vision and values. Because at the same time, the reason oftentimes families may choose a school that's not integrated or seems segregated by race or socioeconomic status is a comfort, a familiarity, a sense that the staff are people you can trust and you can relate with. And if our teachers, our educators are not also developing that cultural competency or that understanding on how to serve diverse students, you are not fully realizing the potential of uh, uh, desegregation and integration, but you are in fact having families choose, do you want the quality education and opportunities, but at the cost of losing a sense of yourself or a sense of your cultural and personal identity.
Okay, woo, listen. This is why you going for the EDD, right? Is it the E? It's the educational doctor, right?
You're right.
I'm super excited for you. I mean, you're spitting this fire right now and dropping these gems. If you're an educator, if you're a motivator for advocacy, for racial disparities that we see in the educational system, you want to chime in. I am so excited. I'm going to take a pause to give an announcement. We're definitely on the move, and we have a vital election that's coming up that can determine just what we're going to do with our racial equity. And even at the local level, there is movement that is happening. People are awakening and saying, you know what? It is time for change. It's time for us to stand up and say what we exactly are wanting. See, COVID had really propelled a lot of us and didn't prepare a lot of us, and a lot of us wasn't prepared. We were reacting to a traumatic event. We often saw that in the educational system. And I'm going to get to you, Philip, on the disparity gap that we're seeing now. I always said if I wanted to go back and get my doctorate, which I'm thinking, I wanted to talk about the psychological, the emotional, and the academia gap that we saw profoundly within those 2 to 3 years that those individual children were not able to be inside of a classroom. It really showed their safe space was gone, the equity in teaching wasn't there. And if you didn't have those things within the home in the first place, those children would then be very low, right? Which we're seeing the outcomes. They're still about a year to 2 years behind where they're supposed to be academically. But let me give you this announcement. The Reinvent South Stockton Coalition is bringing together two forums this year to prepare for the primary elections. One will be February 19th at the New Spirit Missionary Baptist Church located on 10th Street off of Airport Way. And we're going to be having candidates from the mayoral race as well as the Board of Supervisor race, districts 1, 3, and 5. We'll be having our Superior Court judges, District Office 3, and we'll also be running the District 6 race. And we'll be having those candidates there. They'll be talking about their stances on where they want to move the city forward and how we can support progressive moves for our youth, for our individuals that are unsheltered, and for our individuals that are living within the greater Stockton area. And we're also going to be having the very first forum January 29th. January 29th is right around the corner. It's actually this Monday coming up. And so we will be having that at the Courthouse Plaza. You'll be able to stream in and see the candidates if you can't make it in person. But we want you to make it in person. There's a flyer on the Reinvent South Stockton Coalition's Facebook page as well as the Instagram page. You're able to scan that code and submit your comments or questions for each candidate. It's important that we begin to rise up, mobilize, and organize for the change that we're wanting. And we can do this in a way that helps future generations. So, thank you for that announcement. Now, Philip, it was something very important that you said. You know, there's a lot of stereotypes that goes on with education. Let's talk about it. And I'm one of those that are not afraid. So I hope you're not afraid to answer in boldness and with integrity and with grit. But a lot of times there's a lot of stereotypes that we often see. Some of the stereotypes, and please forgive me if I offend you, you can tell me I'm okay. You being an Asian man or Asian descent, there's a heavy component on education. I want you to tell me about your lived experiences growing up in the household you grew up in when it came to education.
Absolutely. And I think, we'd be misstep to not think about the historical and cultural context that either brought my family here or has infused some of the ideas around education. One of the pieces that is important to name, I think about, is the 1950s Immigration Act that finally allowed Asian Americans to actually immigrate. There had been a quota and a cap for them to even come to this country. Again, us thinking about the historical segregation of people or the lack of inclusion to be able to come to a country that we deem as an opportunity for hope. But that Immigration Act allowed people of certain education levels to come, or those who had family here already. So the immigration of my family was through family immigration. There were connections here, but a lot of the other Asian Americans at this time came from countries that were much more educated and much more affluent by bringing the doctors, the lawyers, and engineers here. And so when we think about a history and ancestry of people who had already been acclimated to education and had pushed education, that is why there is a stereotype or this idea that Asian Americans are successful or care about education more. It is part of the context of who has arrived and what assets and opportunities they had already been given. Oftentimes, in the 90s, you got this magazine cover that said model minority. The Asian kids are the whiz kids. And so we often paint this single brush of all of them being successful. But the bigger and more important picture is there is context for why some of that is. And then we further exclude the conversation with regards to disaggregating the data, thinking about Southeast Asians and South Asians and the biggest disparities in our country with regards to both income and college attainment also comes from our Pacific Islander communities, our South Asian, especially in Stockton, Lao, Hmong communities. And when we paint this singular picture that Asian Americans are successful, we dismiss the experiences of so many other communities and where they've come from, especially if they've come as refugees. And this also then goes back to being in the city that represents all these cultures. You don't learn those stories when you go to a school that is not integrated or that is not in a place to share about the cultural and historical experiences of others.
Come on, Philip. Listen, you bring in everything that we need tonight. Come on, get it right for the ancestors. I think about the experiences of our Japanese internment camps. I
Mhm.
think about the experiences of the individuals that were brought over.
Mhm.
Used to call the Oriental Express, which is not a good term, y'all. Don't use that term. But to build our railroads, to build the engineering, the irrigation. A lot of y'all
Mhm.
don't even know. There's a small fishing town just west of 8 Mile in Iselton that a lot of the individuals that built our agriculture were our Asian community members. We have rich community history here, and it's not talked about in the way it's supposed to. But I notice even with the second and third generations, they're kind of getting away from the fact of what was brought here and they're getting assimilated, right? We're seeing that we're not remembering what our ancestors and all of the things they put forth, right? We think about Isang Basak, and I probably didn't say it right. Did I say it right, Philip? It's
Mhm.
and how we came together in United Farm Workers for the rights of individuals that were in our fields bringing food to our tables, right? And we got together with our Mexican farm workers and we demanded, it's so much rich history, even when we talk about Little Manila. And I think about even the displacement, the trauma that had happened. So first, the first generation was brought over here, whether it was to work, whether it was to work their dead off, and that's true, right? Human trafficking is real, right?
Mm.
It's so many sacrifices that were brought here. So we can have the education that we need to break the cycles of poverty, to break the intergenerational levels of not having the funds or the generational wealth to come into the family. A lot of our Asian community love the engineering arts they love the doctoral arts and they love education and it was built into them because it was told by their ancestors and their elders to push forward to be the best that you can be because we did so much to even get here, right? um, there's a quickening also that I noticed with a lot of us, where the identity is lost too, especially on top of segregation. So here you are, you got to learn about American history. You're stripped of your history. And then we don't even get the real American history at that, right? Because if we really got the real American history, then it wouldn't be such a struggle to show up as our true identified selves. And do you find that oftentimes in education, even in like in your experiences, going to a very high level university that you graduated from, was it hard to try to find truth in a lot of their teachings in their curriculum?
Yeah, I think the first opportunities to really reflect on my identity, racial identity, the, various identities that make me who I am was through the college experience. And I think that comes so late from where research has students exploring who they are. That happens around age 8. They start to develop conceptions of self, conceptions of community, the world around them. And that's often why you see in upper elementary school and middle school, people care so much of their peer experience or what other people think of them, because you're often putting on masks to truly figure out and understand who you are. So it was not until the college opportunities did I even get the opportunity to be in spaces for those kinds of discussions. So I applied California for now instituting for public high schools to offer ethnic studies. But again, that is just an option for people to explore kind of those conversations. And I really think it goes back to the priority of schools. If we think education is about public good and bringing people together and teaching us how to be civically engaged citizens, we give students at the age appropriate opportunity to be able to dissect and unpack who they are and better understand the histories and learning of other people. And again, in a history so rich in Stockton, like these are conversations that aren't happening for young people, which are rich opportunities for learning.
You know, when I was teaching also about the development of slavery policy, I was teaching here at a local university here, at actually University of Pacific. There was still, even at the level of the master's level, it was still a, it was still a disconnect to how that trickled into academia. The expectations of even the students were not as large as I would have hoped for, even in my career as a professor. And I'm noticing that we have a gap in learning. We have a gap in rich history that supports how we view the world. I've noticed even in different developing countries, they're learning 2 to 3 languages as a must. They're learning critical thought, theory, engineering, coding. So let's move forward into your school that you have now recently charted and opened. And I want to talk about what you're going to be teaching the children there, what the curriculum can look like, what are the parents maybe expecting, how you even get the family unit involved in education, because this is how we break the generational nuances or the things that we don't know, right, about our identity and even our capabilities, right?
Mhm.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, well, the truth of the matter is the family needs to be a part of the journey from the beginning. So, this school that we are launching, parents have been part of this effort in focus groups, in surveys, in designing elements, as well as having their students participate in pilot experiences. I think two of the core issues or difficulties in general in education right now, one is that it's not engaging enough. We're competing against technology, cell phones, so much dopamine and stimuli that education really needs to have rich, authentic experiences that are meaningful. And then the second piece of it is our schools are becoming much more diverse. And for a student to feel like they can learn and feel successful, they need to be able to bring their whole selves to the classroom, be able to be their whole selves in school and have that comfort and confidence. And so those are two pieces that are fundamental to our school model called Unbound Stockton. We see our name as our vision, that there should be no boundaries to the learning that happens within the community and with each other. And so to combat both the diversity piece and the opportunity to feel confident in oneself, but also the engagement piece. What students learn in the classroom in math, science, English, social studies, they apply to a community experience every single week. So what we've been doing in terms of these pilot experiences, for example, we taught kids the history of voting rights and suffrage and who got to vote when they could. And we also had them think about their local representatives. Who are they? Do they represent them? And then we worked with the local League of Women's Voters, who trained our eighth graders how to register people to vote. The kids went out in the community to register people to vote, and that connected directly with civics and government, and then an application to create change. And
Come
we've
on,
continued.
Philip. You creating pathways. That's what I'm talking about. You
Mhm.
are a good and righteous gatekeeper, right? That's the problem. The gatekeeping that we've historically had have not been able to even conceptualize that children at a very young age can do.
Mhm.
And here we are in the most developed country, right?
Mhm.
In North America, where we're now seeing these type of charters uh, taking on this type of curriculum to support the the what's the new, I want to say, just not the cultivation, but the conditioning of the new child, right? Because this new child, where I notice even how our children had to pivot, some of them, when the pandemic came, had learned how to navigate Zoom, had learned how to navigate the computer. Some of them were teaching their parents how to get on and stream. It was hard for the millennials, the baby boomer grandmamas that was raising babies, but these babies pivot so fast. And so it takes educators like yourself to really take that, captivate that, channel it, and how do you nurture it, right? And I love that you're saying that this curriculum is embedded with real lived experiences, but also ability to have like real internships and real working ethics outside of the textbook.
And I think that is back to the original story I had told, which is often the narrative is to be successful. You are academically successful and you leave, but rather we're bringing kids in. Again, our model is for fourth through eighth grade students. At the time, they're exploring their identities, understanding sense of community. But the more they're actively engaged and involved, we believe that this gives them a love and passion of their community and understanding on how to create agency and change, that they won't feel like they have to leave or go to college first before they create change, that they can see this as their home and opportunity to become future lifelong leaders. And that's often a misstep when we think about students in this age group, because it's been all about giving them exploration, choice, opportunity. even when we think about our second recess, which we break the mold from, we adapt that into what we call lunchtime clubs, where our students are deciding what they want to lead, how they're going to lead it, how they're going to cater and create the culture, and then writing us a budget of what are the things that they want us to buy so that they can fully acclimate and learn in their club experience.
Listen, Phillip, they not ready for you. They not ready for you. Now, this sounds like in long ago, I'm gonna say about 20 years ago, because I was in a pathways to teaching when I was at Stagg High School. And I thought I wanted to be a teacher. I love philosophy, I love teaching, I love leading. And I thought I was going to be able to connect with a younger group of primary kids. And I remember going into my internship, funny story, because I use funny stories to help heal and connect. And I remember I couldn't do a simple it was a simple algebra. And I was in the third grade at the time visiting a young boy, and he taught me that formation, that geometry equation, and then looked at me and said, "Are you sure you want to be a teacher?" At that moment, I knew, no, thank you. No, thank you. But it takes a special person to go into teaching. What are the things that our teachers are going to need to be equipped in order to desegregate this system, right? What are the things they're going to need? I also ran one of the first healing school pilot programs, and I wrote this program, and we initiated in partnership at El Dorado School that year. And I was hearing a lot of the newer teachers' frustrations on how to pivot with all of the behavioral and mental health situations they were seeing. So I want you to keep that in mind as we're talking. There may be some teachers, there may be some educators that are here on the line, but what you're talking about is transformative. And if that's a real thing, right? In theory. And I'm not even going to call it theory no more because it's people like you that are doing it. So, transformative education. What is it that our teachers are going to need in order to enact this, let's say, nationwide?
Mhm. I think first of all, it is reframing our ideas of teachers. You said you couldn't be a teacher, but you were on this podcast teaching. You led initiatives around healing schools. Like you are the definition of an educator, and we shouldn't limit the confines of how we work together to raise our youth. We go back to the old adage of it takes a village, and it really does because we are all contributing. And I think that is us having the mind frames as teachers and educators to partner with families, to think about who their first teacher and first educators truly were, and building those bridges to help their all our students be academically successful. And then I think there's this additional layer in which we know that there are so many community partners and opportunities to bring into the fold. And that's why our model works. And that's why we have so much belief in it, because we piloted this. We brought kids to Hatch Workshop to do Makers Made experiences. We took kids to the Mexican Heritage Center to do painting opportunities, to think about their identity and history. And so teaching can be such an isolating experience if you are in your room by yourself thinking you have the full obligation to educate these 25 to 30 students. But if we reframe teaching in a way that brings everyone into the fold, including parents, including administrators, including the community, we can really have a larger and stronger impact together. And I think the traditional one teacher to a whole bunch of students isn't working. And so part of our model is including an additional adult at every single grade level to support differentiation, to even just give the teacher a break to go to the bathroom. Like that's the unfounded idea that teachers may need to step away for themselves. And so we need to bring in this concept of true collaboration at the teacher level, which I think reflects the kind of collaboration community that we want to see students to have as well.
So is it smaller classrooms that we're going to be expecting at Unbound? And is it a lottery to get in? Tell us how we can get in, what funding or maybe volunteer work that you're looking for. What is it that you're the need now?
Great. So Unbound Stockton is a public school. So we are free for enrollment for any student who is age eligible. The conditions of something like a charter like ours is that if there is more interest than we have seats, we have to do a free public random lottery. So there is no picking or choosing or gatekeeping of who has this opportunity. And that's why it's so important in our recruitment efforts to be able to speak to students and families of all different communities, to be able to offer this opportunity, to speak to the idea that we want a racially and socioeconomically diverse students population that represent North Stockton, South Stockton, East Stockton. Going back to this idea of segregation, you choose your neighborhood school, you're choosing to isolate in the community of those students. And this is, and again, there's no wrong choice in that. But if you also don't push on the opportunities to engage and really have an understanding of identity or build bridges in other means, I think you're missing out an opportunity that our school provides with a hands-on actionable opportunities to learn and contribute back to the community. And so what we're hoping for and looking for is the opportunity to introduce this model to parents. We continue to have free spring break camp opportunities coming up for families and students to experience this. And at the end of the day, families and students who have seen that they can apply their learning, make an impact, are really enthused about this school. And that's why we've gotten as far as we have, because of the contributions of community wanting to see this happening.
I love it. And I'm going to get a little political here because I've heard this rebuttal. And we saw this, a lot of this back and forth that was happening even in our Stockton Unified School District when they were trying to get things together. And it looks like they're going to pull through. But we saw that a lot of, the teachers or maybe potential teacher unions that were supporting the teachers had a real problem with charter schools. Taking jobs from teachers or funding, whatever the case may be, or whatever the argument was. How are we supporting those teachers from moving away from maybe some more archaic ways of learning, right? This sounds more of a progressive, transformative learning. Um, what's the pros and the cons to this?
I think absolutely we need to be able to respect and support all our teachers, all our school systems. And again, that goes back to this reframing and mindset that we are all collaboratively as a village supporting our students. And it's unfortunate that we've gotten to this political divide where charters and traditional schools don't have the opportunity to work together, to learn from each other, to dialogue. The initial conception of charter schools in 1990 was a union created idea to be used as like a laboratory experiment to be able to test out interesting and progressive ideas that would come back into the traditional school system. So I think one of the most important things is that there continues to be lines of dialogue and support. And the way we use our language is thinking about all students together and how we collectively serve them. One of the things that was intentional for us was not to be a whole K-12 system, because you're implicitly saying we want you to remove yourself from that traditional district ultimately. But we actually feel like the things that we are providing are unique, and our students should go back into the traditional system, share what they learn about the community, how they have leadership. And so keeping those lines of communication always open are important. And then I also think it's super important to advocate for teachers in terms of pay, in terms of opportunity and benefits. And we are in an unequal system when charters have the opportunity to leverage either a smaller school size or opportunity for those choice. And school districts have to go through this bargaining process. So we need to open up the conversation to come together to elevate the profession of teaching, as well as ensure that there are appropriate rights, appropriate pay, safe working conditions for everyone, because if any teacher is suffering, we're all suffering in that profession. And so that is how we need to reframe the conversation about elevating us all together, but also being willing to sit in the spaces and have the tough conversations. At the end of the day, offering different school choice options gives families options, but does have a detriment financially. So how do we create inclusive systems that create these opportunities to create these different models? Unfortunately, having conversations and wanting the opportunity to work with the district or create this within the district didn't happen. So we live in a reality. You have to step out of the box and do it independently, unfortunately. But I'm hoping the work that we're doing can be infused back and create more conversations, so we don't need to continue to create outside external changes, but we can transform the system together.
Wow. Okay. So listen, it sounds, even to me as an adult with a master's and the level of education that I have and all the certificates, your school sounds intimidating as hell. Tell me, would it be appropriate to say that it's open for all? And I know you have to say that, but could one of the most vulnerable, most marginalized children, the ones with the most profuse trauma, be a part of something like this? How are you catering to those children who may not have the resiliency factor? They may be feeding themselves, or they're the, lucky kids, or they walk home, or they're, reared by grandmother or an elder generation. They don't have the mother and the father, or they may be in foster care, right? You have all these factors that sometimes become barriers in achieving the educational gap, right? And making that minimal. Tell me, what is Unbound Stockton doing for our particular children who need that type of help?
Mhm. Yeah, I don't want us just to say we're open and accessible to everyone. I want it to be the truth and in name, and that I think every student, we will see them and we will provide the opportunities for them to succeed. And I think that first and foremost is about accessibility and inclusivity. So thinking about our outreach, thinking about our recruitment, what communities and conversations are we having, and then how do we provide the resources again from the community and collaborate so all students are successful. And then once you're in the school, it's about creating that safe and inclusive environment for one to be successful. Again, if you can't bring your whole self to the table, you can't bring your whole self to learn and grow and succeed. And so at the fundamental level of the teachers we hire, the founding team that we bring together, it's about having all students on our campus feel seen. And then in terms of learning modalities and in terms of academic success, we know invariably in this kind of model, students are going to come at all different levels of academic performance, but that shouldn't hinder you from being able to access learning opportunities, which include how you engage, how you think about the community around you, what you care about in terms of your ideas. All of our curricular units are paired with a community partner, which present a problem of practice for our students to solve. So if it is going to City Hall for a tour and there's a current bill being heard, our students will be presented that bill and they will come up with their own bills to present back to City Hall. And so when I think about that, no student, regardless of academic experience or ability, has the ability to critically think, come up with their own ideas and solutions. They might not be able to write it, but they can say it. They can be on a podcast. They can share it on video. We believe accessibility and opportunity to present that knowledge should exist in a number of different ways. And I think that's another piece of inclusion in how you feel seen and how you feel like you can access your learning opportunity, which isn't necessarily purely by reading, writing, or speaking, but about just being and being acknowledged for the gifts that you bring to the table.
Listen, Philip, let me tell you, brother, you have absolutely made my day. I thank you so much for coming on the podcast spitting the wisdom that you have gotten in your short time on this earth. Really ancestral wisdom and the need to gain knowledge and bring it to our children and our youth. They are the future. I want to thank you again, Philip. I want you to plug Unbound Stockton, where they can find you, and how they can find you. Go ahead and do that.
Yeah, so Unbound Stockton, our website is unboundstockton.org, as well as all our social media. The handles are at Unbound Stockton. You'll see me on those platforms doing the work, communicating with families. So please reach out there. The biggest thing is introducing students to those community opportunities. So if there are opportunities to connect, help students see education, teaching, learning being broader than just between the four walls of a classroom, want to discuss and have that dialogue. And at the end of the day, I am only an expert in my lived experience. So if there's the opportunity to dialogue, I think super important. If Unbound Stockton is about students engaging across lines of difference, I would love to engage with you across lines of difference, even if you have a different opinion, if you have a different frame of thought. I will learn, we will learn by being in community together and having those discussions. And so I need to be the kind of leader who leans into those values as well. So I hope to hear from some of you again. RebelRae, please invite me in the future, especially when our school is kicked off and our students will be leading this podcast next time. And we can continue to engage in how we're transforming the city together.
Ashe, always welcome the youth. Listen, they got something to say if we're willing to listen. I thank you again, Philip, and Ashe to you.
Ashe.
Listen, Phillip Hon came through, blessed us on the mic, blessed us with some wisdom, blessed us with some inspiration. And if you weren't inspired, get inspired, right? There are movers and shakers around Stockton and Greater San Joaquin and in California, period, in the nation that are moving toward a more just and equitable society. And we got to be at the forefront. I want you all to remember how blessed you are, how blessed that an ancestor thought enough of you to be here today. They pushed through, and so therefore you must never give up. You know, we're coming up here on Black History Month, and there's some other things that are happening in February along with Valentine's Day. And I am hoping that you all have a beautiful evening. Make sure that you say your inspirational aspirations. If you haven't did your vision board yet for the year, make sure you make it plain. Make sure you make it brilliant. Make sure that you make it powerful just like you are. And I tell you in the wise words of all of the things and all of the people, be blessed, peace and blessings. Go in light, go in love, go in your healing. And thank you for tuning in. And I will see you next week, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, here on the Prune Tree Podcast.